We are keeping a close eye on the Vatican as the world mourns the loss of Pope Francis, known as the People's Pope, who passed away early this morning. We'll have much more coverage on his incredible legacy and life and what comes next for the world's 1.4 billion Catholics coming up shortly. But we start with breaking news out of the White House and the brewing conflict sparked by Donald Trump. It threatens to send shockwaves through the U.S. economy and the world's economies. The market's reacting to Donald Trump's ongoing onslaught of personal attacks and smears on Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. All three major stock indices experiencing major losses today. The Dow Jones down more than 900 points. The cause? The dangerous one-man game of chicken that Donald Trump is playing with the job of the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell. Shortly after markets opened today, Donald Trump called on Powell to cut interest rates and called him a, quote, major loser, end quote. That smear came on the heels of Kevin Hassett, Donald Trump's director for the National Economic Council, telling reporters on Friday while markets were closed that the Trump administration is looking at possible ways to fire Jerome Powell. Powell has said in public on camera that he cannot be fired by Donald Trump. He has said that publicly. But the ongoing attacks and this direct attack on the institution that undergirds the entire American and, by extension, world economies, the institution that investors here and around the world look to and trust, is leading to fears of a deepening economic crisis. New York Times reports this, quote, the U.S. dollar continued its slide against nearly every other major currency. It fell about 1% against the euro on Monday to the lowest in more than 3 years. The dollar also fell against the Japanese yen to its lowest level since September. The trend is even more stark against some other currencies. The dollar at its lowest it has been against the Swiss franc in more than a decade. Here's how our friend and colleague Steve Liesman put it earlier today.
This is what you get. I mean, somebody needs to turn to the camera and tell the president to stop. I mean, he is messing with the foundation of this country. He's messing with the foundation of the economy. He's messing with America's place in the global financial system. Where's Jamie Dimon and David Solomon and Brian Moynihan? Where are the leaders of our financial community calling on the president to stop this business about trying to fire the Fed chair? And you see what you get here in the markets, right? I think these people they're the leaders of the financial community. They have a ton at stake, and I think they have to step up.
Right there, what you just saw is where we start today with Steve Liesman, CNBC senior economics reporter. Over to you. I mean, where are those people? And I've been asking this story from a political chair in which I sit, seeing the incoming instability, seeing chicken isn't the right analogy because Jerome Powell isn't playing chicken. He's doing his job. But Trump is playing chicken with something even bigger than the markets, with the global economy, with the country, with our place in the world. Why aren't those folks speaking up?
Well, I think they fear the president. I mean, you've seen the way he's gone after the legal firms. He's gone after the universities. They don't want him to go out. Look, they have a lot at stake. I don't judge them, but it just strikes me that at some point, somebody with some authority has to step up and say, this is not the way to do things. I mean, look, Nicole, this was another day in financial markets in Trump's America. He turned around and he hit the ball squarely into his own goal. And he scored another own goal. This did not have to happen today. We ended up down 900 and something points on the Dow Jones. We were off as much as 1,200. And it really looks directly related to his comments and fears that the president is going to potentially fire the Fed chair. We don't know if that's going to happen. Some people put a low probability on it. But let me see if I can connect this to the things that you report on all day long, which is not necessarily the financial markets, but what's going on with the Supreme Court, what's going on with the legal firms, what's going on with Harvard and these other schools. There are things that the president has done that nobody ever thought a president would do. And that's why in financial markets, you cannot dismiss some probability that the president will fire the Fed chair. People say, oh, it's not going to happen. I said, well, we thought he was going to follow the Supreme Court. We thought he was not going to necessarily withhold X billions of dollars from Harvard. So it's all of the same piece in that you cannot relax and you cannot bet on a team where the captain is hitting the ball into his own net.
Steve, let me try to connect the questions you asked to the questions I've asked for 9 years. I mean, why not Jamie Dimon? And I will judge him in this context. I would never question his economic acumen, right? Not my expertise. I come and I speak to you with all the humility I can muster. But as an American, why not ask every corner of our country to want the best for the whole country? And if you destroy the economy, you destroy the first person Donald Trump promised to help, the forgotten man and woman. Why not judge Jamie Dimon for not doing more to stand up for the forgotten men and women who are the whole reason we're here? Donald Trump so effectively communicated with them going back to 2015. Why not ask Jamie Dimon to do more for them?
Well, I obviously think they ought to be stepping up. They ought to be talking. I guess the point I was making is these are regulated institutions, and this president, if he wants, can bring the hammer down on them. They have a responsibility on their shoulders. I'm not going to defend them. I think they do need to speak up, and I think if this goes any further, look, the thing that connects all of the things that were in the red today, and you read them, the dollar, bonds, and stocks, is people are selling U.S. assets. They're selling America, and we've talked about that before. And at some point, they need to step up and help put some kind of floor under this market, some kind of sense that there are people in this country with authority who will step up to protect essentially America's preeminent place in the globe when it comes to financial markets.
You know, Andrew Ross Sorkin sat here, and I like a dog with a bone. I could not let it go that what you're saying, what he was saying was true, that they're afraid, not necessarily just for themselves, but for the institutions they lead, the businesses they lead, and the shareholders to whom they are responsible. But I guess I want to ask you if that's changing, if they see Harvard taking a different approach and standing and fighting, if they see the 4 law firms that decided to fight Donald Trump's retribution and they see the court siding with them, are those stories being tracked closely? Are they being watched by the leaders of companies and the general counsels of companies? I mean, are they considering a more confrontational posture?
Not that I know of. I mean, I know I've talked to some of them on background, and their initial, before all this stuff with the Fed chair started, was to try to lay low, ride it out, and see if they could essentially get by unscathed. But I think you're making an interesting point, Nicole, that they're fast approaching a place where they're not going to be able to get by unscathed, where their share prices and all the things that they actually care about and the work that they do is not going to be, they cannot be immune from this. And at some point, they're going to have to step forward. I will point out, Nicole, that Congress has not shown much more spine than these bankers out there. So in terms of where I know some Democrats have spoken up, but in terms of the actual actions taken by Congress, they have not done anything. I know that there's been some attempt to do some behind-the-scenes work. I know that Scott Bessent, you read that story in the Wall Street Journal, where they had to wait for Peter Navarro to leave the room in order for Bessent and Lutnick to go in and get the president to annul his or to change his mind about his reciprocal tariffs. Well, if that's what's going on in the White House, it's kind of interesting to think about whether the bankers could even have some effect.
Well, look, that is the quintessential Trump story. I mean, the first time he left the country, advisors had to wait for other advisors to leave the room to sneak in America's affirmation to Article 5 and our NATO obligations into a speech. I mean, the Trump story is always some version of this, right? Bessent has to wait, and it's like third grade, right? You have to wait until the bully goes to the bathroom to get all the kids to stand on the side of the kid being. I mean, it's the quintessential Trump story, and I guess I always come back to this curiosity about whether they're changing the way they look at Trump, whether it's no longer a set of policies, but a real desire to understand the psychology of Donald Trump and the people around him. Have they shifted the lens with which they're looking at Trump, or are they still trying to gird?
I think they're trying to keep on his good side because, as you remember, Nicole, they are trying to get the Federal Reserve and other bank regulators to loosen some of the regulations that came out of the great financial crisis. And so they're hoping for that to come through. And I think that is something that is keeping them at bay, the hope that that will happen. And whether or not they speak up, I think they think there's some danger that they could put that reform that they're hoping for in danger if they come out and try to get the president to ease the rhetoric about the Fed chair. Look, I don't think it's an issue that well, it is, but we've kind of normalized this idea that the president is going to have his say on monetary policy. But the idea of him calling him a loser and toying with this idea of replacing him, that's what ends up creating or making a third world financial system or third world country out of the United States.
Is there a scenario where they think this passes? I mean, is there still wish casting, or do they take Donald Trump seriously?
I mean, that's for you to figure out. I think they would listen to you on that. It's the old seriously versus literally.
Nobody listens to me. Nobody in my house. Nobody listens. I guess what I'm really trying to ask is, are they hoping for the best still? Do they think he'll move on from Jerome Powell?
I think they are hoping for the best. I think, they're kind of dismissing it. But look, I mean, I'm getting messages from people, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. He's going to replace him. And I'm getting messages from people that say, nah, he would never do it. So, I mean, it's the old, like I guess in Nicole, they promised me there'd be no politics on this. It's the seriously versus literally idea.
Yeah.
I think that when we look at how these markets are trading, we see them trading with some probability. That's what I think what today's sell-off was about, that there could be a replacement of the Fed chair, and that would, as we've discussed, deeply undermine trust and faith in the U.S. capital system.
I can tell you that when you're working in government and Bob Woodward's number pops up on your phone, which has happened to me, your heart rate picks up a little bit, no matter what administration you're in. And he's going to be here at the table in just a few minutes. But first, I want to show you something he said the last time we spoke, because it was right after the election, just a few weeks after. And one of the things we talked about was the glaring incompetence of the people Donald Trump was picking for his cabinet. People like Pete Hegseth.
I have known over the reporting time I've had for 5 decades, 16 secretaries of defense. Going back even before I was reporter Robert McNamara. And they have to know management. They have to know what the responsibility is. They have to know where the levers of power are. And in this appointee, I see none of that.
16 secretaries of defense. I see none of that, is what he said. And yet it didn't take an investigative mind like Bob Woodward's to know that Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense might be slightly problematic. I mean, before running the U.S. military, he was a weekend morning show host on Fox News with a reputation for going years without washing his hands, which, by the way, is his admission, just to make it even weirder. And no shade to cable news hosts, obviously, even ones who get a little crazy on New Year's Eve, you can see there. It's not a job that exactly prepares you to run the Pentagon as your next step. There were also the countless allegations of Hegseth drinking on the job, both at veterans organizations and at Fox News. The New Yorker reported he once got so drunk that he had to be restrained from getting on a stage at a Louisiana strip club. There were the allegations that he ran those relatively small veterans organizations into the ground financially. And of course, there were the allegations about his abuse of women, including his second wife. He denied all of it, of course, but yeah, it's safe to say there were some signs that maybe this guy wasn't exactly fit for the job of overseeing the Defense Department. And so when we saw this headline at the end of March, it was one of those things that was both shocking but kind of unsurprising. And the very first paragraph of Jeffrey Goldberg's story was, again, both shocking but entirely unsurprising in a lot of ways. I mean, here's what it said, quote, "The world found out shortly before 2 p.m. Eastern time on March 15th that the United States was bombing Houthi targets across Yemen. I, however, knew 2 hours before the first bombs exploded that the attack might be coming. The reason I knew this is that Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, had texted me the war plan at 11:44 a.m. The plan included precise information about weapons, packages, targets, and timing. Well, A few hours after that story was published, Jeffrey Goldberg was here at this table, and we watched together as Pete Hegseth looked straight into the camera and lied about what Jeffrey Goldberg knew to be true.
You're talking about a deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes time and time again. Nobody was texting war plans, and that's all I have to say about that.
I'm going to be responsible here and not disclose the things that I read and saw. I will describe them to you. The specific time of a future attack, specific targets, including human targets, meant to be killed in that attack, weapons systems, even weather reports.
Now, as you know, eventually Goldberg did release the screenshots of what Hegseth texted him, laying out in explicit detail the weaponry and sequencing involved with that attack. And even after those screenshots were released, Hegseth kept on lying.
I noticed this morning out came something that doesn't look like war plans. And as a matter of fact, they even changed the title to attack plans because they know it's not war plans. There's no units, no locations, no routes, no flight paths, no sources, no methods, no classified information.
I mean, I've watched that clip a lot of times. It's almost like the louder he talks, the more believable he thinks it will be, I guess. I don't know. But even though we knew he was lying, even though we knew he had texted war plans to a reporter or attack plans, whatever you want to call them, he kept his job. Trump defended him. Republicans in Congress didn't do a whole lot. And despite the fact that there were obviously other signal chats with classified information on them, that story kind of faded into the background, in part because Donald Trump decided to tank the global economy and also ship people to foreign prisons without any charges. My point is, there were a lot of pressing stories to cover. But over the past few days, we started to get this sense that something else might be coming out of Pete Hegseth's Pentagon. Because on Friday, top officials of the Pentagon started getting fired. And they started getting fired for, wait for it, this is almost my favorite detail, leaking. And believe me, the irony is only going to get richer as we keep telling this story. 3 Pentagon officials close to Hegseth, his former senior advisor, Dan Caldwell, former Deputy Chief of Staff, Jaron Selnick, and the Deputy Defense Secretary's Chief of Staff, Colin Carroll, confirmed they were placed on administrative leave. On Friday, we also learned that Joe Casper, Hegseth's own Chief of Staff, would be transferring to a different role in the Pentagon. And John Elliott, another senior Pentagon official, also said he resigned last week, although the Pentagon said they asked him to resign. So lots of firings, a bunch of resignations, apparently about leaks. So yeah, it kind of felt like something was coming. Well, lo and behold, late yesterday afternoon, the New York Times dropped a bombshell report about another signal chat. The Times writes, quote, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth shared detailed information about forthcoming strikes in Yemen on March 15th in a private signal group chat that included his wife, brother, and personal lawyer. Some of those people said that the information Hegseth shared on the signal chat included the flight schedules for the F-A-18 Hornets targeting the Houthis in Yemen. Essentially the same attack plans that he shared on a separate signal chat the same day that mistakenly included the editor of The Atlantic. Now, Hegseth's brother Phil does work at the Pentagon, although he's not anywhere near a role that directly involves military operations, and for good reason. As the AP reports, based on Phil Hegseth's publicly available resume, his past experience includes founding his own podcast production company and working on social media and podcasts at the Hudson Institute. That said, Phil the podcaster might have some kind of security clearance. We really don't know. As for Hegseth's wife, well, she has already been kind of a point of contention. You see, Jennifer Hegseth does not actually work for the Department of Defense. And yet we know that she has been sitting in on sensitive meetings. As the Wall Street Journal reported just last month, quote, one of the meetings, a high-level discussion, took place at a sensitive moment for the transatlantic alliance, one day after the U.S. said it had cut off military intelligence sharing with Ukraine. The group discussed the U.S. rationale behind that decision. The Pentagon has been asked in the past about whether Jennifer, a former Fox News producer, has a security clearance. I don't know why she would, but who knows. They have declined to answer the question, which is quite telling on its own. But here's the thing. Even if both Jennifer the wife and Phil the podcaster do have security clearances, There's no reason for the defense secretary to be texting them attack plans and details about a military operation, because typically the people who have access to this type of information are categorized as need to know. And if you're in the need to know group, it means it's essential that you have the details of the operation or classified information in order to do your jobs. Meaning, just because you have a certain level of security clearance, it doesn't mean you have access to every piece of information that is in that level of security clearance. It's if you really need to know it. Generally, that group does not include a liaison officer like Phil Hegseth, and it certainly does not include the secretary's spouse. So that story broke yesterday, and then Secretary Hegseth's day got, I would say, even worse. As I mentioned just a moment ago, his former aide, a guy by the name of John Elliott, one of the staffers who quit, published an op-ed in Politico describing his month from hell, as he describes it, working for Hegseth. Elliott writes that, quote, "It's hard to see Hegseth remaining in his role for much longer," adding, quote, "The last month has been a full-blown meltdown at the Pentagon, and it's becoming a real problem for the administration." Elliott also hinted at the secretary's week getting even worse, saying, quote, and this is quite a thing to write in an op-ed, "There are very likely more shoes to drop in short order, with even bigger bombshell stories coming this week. Key Pentagon reporters have been telling sources privately." Who knows what will come? We'll see. But a former senior aide is predicting that. Now, just for some context, John Elliott is not at all some sort of undercover resistance crusader. He's the former Pentagon spokesperson, best known for a statement to ESPN defending the Pentagon's decision to wipe references to baseball legend Jackie Robinson's military service by saying, quote, "DEI is dead at the Defense Department." It's that guy. He's also the one who took the lead in kicking a number of prominent media outlets, like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and CNN, out of their Pentagon workspaces. I mean, he's a dyed-in-the-wool MAGA guy. He probably still has his hat in his closet. Maybe he's wearing it on the weekend. I don't know. He's been with Donald Trump since the 2016 campaign. And he actually spends much of that op-ed, I quoted, lavishing praise on Trump's warped view of national security. But he draws the line at Pete Hegseth. And now at least one Republican congressman seems to share his view, saying out loud for the first time that Hegseth must go. And yet, all day long, the White House did what it always does, right before Donald Trump unceremoniously fires someone on social media. We see there's like a pattern here. They close ranks around the guy. The press secretary even took the time to deny a report that Hegseth was about to be fired. And they all just, of course, blame the media for reporting on what people inside the Pentagon told them.
This is what the media does. They take anonymous sources from disgruntled former employees, and then they try to slash and burn people and ruin their reputations.
It's just fake news. They just bring up stories. I guess it sounds like disgruntled employees.
This is what happens when the entire Pentagon is working against you and working against the monumental change that you are trying to implement.
The trumpet in that first few parts is quite something in the background. But that aside, I mean, the Pentagon is working against Pete Hegseth, like the entire Pentagon as an institution. Did the entire Pentagon as an institution type a signal text chain on the Secretary of Defense's personal phone that included detailed military operations and then force him to include his wife and brother? Because that would be quite a story. That would be a huge story. Of course, that's not what happened. And these are the same non-denial denials that Trump world always churns out when they know that a reporter has caught them red-handed, doing something they're not supposed to do. Sadly, we're kind of used to this by now. Seems like every day this administration is scrambling to clean up one mess or another mess. Because when it comes to staffing the government, Donald Trump isn't sending his best.
Right now, a group of 4 Democratic lawmakers is in El Salvador demanding the return of the mistakenly deported Maryland father, Kilmar Abrego Garcia. The Trump administration is refusing to bring him home despite a Supreme Court order to facilitate his return. Joining us now, one of those Democratic lawmakers, Florida Congressman Maxwell Frost. Thank you so much for joining us. What do you know? Is there any chance you'll be meeting with Abrego Garcia while you're there?
Well, we're actually about to do a press conference to speak a little bit about this, but we got word at the embassy that our request has been denied by the government here locally. They say it's because we're not here on an official capacity. This is part of the reason why Representative Robert Garcia and I sent a letter to Chairman Comer of the Oversight Committee asking for this to be an official CODEL. But we're not giving up. We're going to continue. We have more meetings scheduled for the rest of the day. But part of this, too, is making sure that we keep the conversation alive. We're building off of the trip of Senator Van Hollen, and we're not the first members here, and we're not going to be the last.
Well, if you're able to, can you tell me about the meetings that you have scheduled? Do you have any realistic expectation that the position will change, that you may actually be able to see him, to meet with him, to talk to him?
Our hope is that the position will change, but we'll have to see. Of course, this government is very friendly towards the Trump administration and not very friendly to elected Democrats that are here. And the whole reason we're here is it's about Obrego Garcia, but it's also about the rule of law, and it's about ensuring that everybody has due process in our country. And the fact of the matter is the Supreme Court ordered the Trump administration to facilitate the return of this man to the United States, and they're refusing to do so. And from our conversations and our meetings with the embassy, it seems like there is no, there's been no orders given to do this locally with the local U.S. officials that are here. So we have more meetings coming up with a lot of the folks doing the work locally, a lot of human rights organizations around the prisons, around the jails. We're still not full confirmation of what facility he's being held in. So there's still more meetings for the rest of the day. Our hope is we can see him and at a minimum get confirmation of where he is.
As you advocate for the Trump administration to return him to the United States, I want to play the message today from the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt.
We did not make a mistake. We have always maintained that this was an individual who needed to be deported from our country. To the Democrat Party, who thinks that they are going to bring this foreign terrorist back to the United States of America to live a peaceful and happy life, that is never going to happen.
You heard her message to you and other members of your party. She says he will never live a peaceful and happy life in the U.S. What do you say to that?
It just shows that they have no regard for the rule of law, and they can talk all they want on Fox News and spill all the BS they want. The fact of the matter is it was their administration, when all this started, that admitted that they made a mistake in court documents, speaking to the Supreme Court, that they made a mistake. That's the whole reason this decision was handed down. They're trying to appeal things left and right. But the fact of the matter is right now, they are not obeying a Supreme Court decision. And everyone should be very concerned about this. Of course, this is a constitutional crisis, but also this is going to have real impact for people across the country. The reason I'm here is because this impacts my constituents. The Donald Trump in the Oval Office talked about the fact that next he wants to go for quote unquote homegrowns. He's talking about U.S. citizens, sending U.S. citizens here to El Salvador. So this is something we all have to be not just alarmed about, but we have to do things about it. And this is part of the reason I'm here with Representatives Garcia, Dexter, and Ansari, because we have a certain privilege being members of Congress. We can come here, ask these tough questions, go to these places, and make sure that the conversation is top of mind for Americans. Everybody should be concerned about this. So Caroline can say whatever the hell she wants. She's just saying whatever Trump wants her to say. But at the end of the day, we have to continue to fight, because there's going to be an end to this story. And the end that we want is for him to be back in the United States and he can go through his due process there.
We only have a minute left, but where do you see that going? Is it through the courts? I think reasonably you probably don't have an expectation that you're going to be able to meet with him. You don't have an expectation that Donald Trump is going to change the position of his administration. So where does this go? How do you accomplish what you want to accomplish?
It's going to be the courts and it's going to be the people. Of course, they've appealed, and we think there's going to be another decision that goes up to the Supreme Court. They're going to continue to make up lies. And this is also when the people come in. And we know, and we've seen the numbers, that this is a very unpopular move the administration is doing. Look, they know that when he is returned back to the United States, it's going to be a huge political blow to this administration. That is why people like Caroline Leavitt are on Fox News, are on all these conservative news networks, network saying, no matter what, we're not going to let down. He's not coming back to the United States. The fact of the matter is they don't know that. And this is part of the reason why we have to continue to fight. This is not, the book has not been shut on this case of Abrego Garcia, and the book has not been shut on our Constitution. And that's part of the reason we're here today.
Congressman Maxwell Frost, thank you. Appreciate it.
Tributes continue to pour in from world leaders, remembering a pope who promised a more compassionate Catholic Church through diplomacy and outreach. In his final Easter message, Pope Francis continued that work, denouncing violence in global conflicts and pushing for peace in Gaza and Ukraine. But it was Pope Francis's empathy and advocacy for migrants in Europe and the United States that caused a clash with Vice President J.D. Vance, who was one of the last world leaders to have a papal meeting. Joining us now, New York Times chief White House correspondent and MSNBC political analyst Peter Baker, and former U.S. ambassador to the Holy See and current John Courtney Murray University chair in public service at Loyola University, Miguel Diaz. Peter, I want to start with you. President Trump has ordered flags across the country to fly at half-staff in tribute to the Pope's passing. But Pope Francis found himself at odds with the Trump administration not infrequently, and particularly most recently with J.D. Vance. What more can you tell us about the relationship and how that meeting went and how each side characterized it? Because it seemed very different depending on whose readout you were reading.
Yeah, look, it was a tense relationship. I think a lot of the policies that President Trump advanced were anathema to Pope Francis way back in the beginning of Trump's presidential, elevation in 2016. He talked about building a wall, of course, at his rallies. And the Pope says those who talk about building walls rather than bridges, they're not Christian. And President Trump, then candidate Trump, fired back saying, well, it's disgusting to question somebody's faith. So they had a bad start, let's say, to that relationship. He did visit the Pope in 2017. They had, by all accounts, a convivial enough time together. But over the years, you're right, the Pope has been critical either directly or elliptically of some of the policies that Trump has put into place, particularly with regard to immigration, policies that the Pope considered to be less than empathetic. And the president has bristled at that. At the same time, he understands that his base includes an awful lot of Catholics. A lot of Catholics support President Trump. So he's been careful to not go too far at times. And he did put out a statement of condolence today. But it was a short and very concise one, simply saying, rest in peace. May God bless all those who loved him.
I mean, Peter, but this wasn't the only place that the Pope weighed in on a lot of global affairs. In 2021, he actually cautioned Christians against using the Bible to justify political views. I think we have that sound for you.
It disturbs me when I hear Christians who say verses from the Bible and try and use them to bring the Lord into support of that particular message. It's not just a question of remembering the words. We have to remember with our heart. We have to open our heart so that we hear the words that the Lord is speaking to us here and now.
Peter, especially compared to his predecessor, it seems like he was much more politically active. What can you tell us about his diplomacy, how big of an impact it had, and how other world leaders are reacting to his passing?
Yeah, it was a more politically active Pope in a lot of senses. Certainly more, on the side of the liberals' order of things on many issues like climate change, like immigration, even on issues like gay rights, where he was at least a little bit more, talking about compassion rather than condemnation. I was covering his visit to the United States in 2015 when he visited with Barack Obama, then the president, and the two of them shared some of the same priorities when it came to social justice. At the same time, of course, the church and American liberals are still obviously on different sides when it comes to issues like abortion and family issues, traditional family issues. And he was, of course, the leader of that church, so they didn't always see eye to eye with even people like President Obama. But clearly, I think for Americans, Catholics, particularly on the liberal side, he was somebody who gave voice to the priorities that they espoused. They gave voice to the values as they saw the church, should be espousing. And I think that he stood apart from some of his predecessors in that regard.
Ambassador, can you talk to us about why migrants, immigration was such an important issue for this Pope? Why was it such a big driver and something he spoke out on so often?
We have to first and foremost think where he comes from, right? He, a child of Italian immigrants, lived in Argentina, a country in Latin America continent that has been experiencing migrations on an ongoing basis for a number of reasons. I myself, I'm a Cuban American, a child of migrants, and could identify with the desperate flight of migrants across the world. We also have to remember that the very first thing that he does back in 2013 when he leaves Rome, goes to the island of Lampedusa. We can perhaps draw a parallel between Lampedusa and our Ellis Island here in the Statue of Liberty and what that means for us as a nation that welcomes immigrants. But in that visit, he issued a statement embraced the concept that would become a signature for his papacy, which is a denunciation of the globalization of human indifference. He said at that point, I have his quote in front of me, "We are a society which has forgotten how to weep, how to experience compassion, suffering with others. The globalization of indifference has taken from us the ability to weep." And I think those words are as significant then as they are now, as we continue to struggle with the ongoing displacement of thousands around us and around the world. And really this papacy, his particular voice has been from the very beginning a voice that was trying to draw the attention to the displaced, to the marginalized, to the environmental crisis. And as Peter said, yes, in his famous statement, "Who am I to judge?" He also drew from his compassionate heart to welcome and to draw attention to the suffering of LGBTQ plus persons, and has met with trans persons throughout his papacy. And so I think that this Pope will be remembered as someone who put mercy first, who put the human person in human persons and their concrete human conditions before laws, before principles and precepts, and wanted us to do the same. Wanted us to encounter our humanity and to humanize one another rather than to demonize each other.
Yeah, it seems like empathy and forgiveness were really big parts of his ministry. And we talked a little bit about his background. He was the first Latin American pope. He was the first from the global south. He studied chemistry at university. We talked about him microwaving his food on his own earlier. He also used to ride the subway when he was cardinal in Buenos Aires. And this all kind of contributed to this brand he had as the people's pope. Can you talk about how he related to people on a human level and how that impacted how the world saw him and the impact he had on the world?
Look, I'll share a story I had a couple of years ago. There's an initiative that 4 of us from Loyola University of Chicago, 4 professors, along with Dr. Emil Sekuda, who's the secretary for the Pontifical Commission for Latin America, spearheaded. And we've been having these conversations with Pope Francis and students from around the world. And I had an opportunity to, along with the other 4 professors from here, from Chicago, Loyola University of Chicago, to visit him because the event has been so successful. And I had an opportunity to sing to him one of the famous tangos from Latin America, Adios muchachos, compañeros de mi vida. And, in his jovial personality, he broke into laughter. And we had a conversation that was both light but also very serious about the challenges of our times. In that conversation, he drew from his Ignatian, it's the first Jesuit Pope, as you mentioned, his Ignatian spirituality, and called us. He said, what we need is not to condemn the youth, not to hit them with the laws. We need to really listen. We need to listen to their experiences, to their struggles. We ought not to start with these rules and regulations. And there he echoed, the Jesuit, dimension of his papacy, which is to really try as much as we can to encounter the sacred, to encounter God in every human living being, in every neighbor, in everyone around us, rather than to begin with a word of condemnation and a word of exile towards those around us. And so I think that he leaves that legacy and an invitation for each one of us, whether we're believers or not, for those of us that care about humanity, to really turn to our neighbors and to see them as human beings rather than as animals, or rather than as objectify them or demonize them and expel them from our immediate milieu, or from our countries, or from the global community of nations. And so I think that's his both diplomatic and his religious legacy to all of us.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Peter Baker and Ambassador Miguel Diaz, thank you both so much.
4 House Democrats are in El Salvador this morning trying to secure the release of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. This comes just days after Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen's visit. We heard from the senator just a few moments ago. The lawmakers say they plan to meet with Salvadorian officials at the U.S. Embassy to advocate for Abrego Garcia's return and get information on the other migrants who were deported to a notorious Salvadorian prison. Democratic Congressman Robert Garcia of California is leading the delegation and joins us now live from El Salvador. Congressman, good morning. Thank you for being with us this morning. You're there with 3 fellow Democrats. Talk to us, just start why this mission here is so important, and not just about Mr. Abrego Garcia, but all the others who were deported, many would say, without due process.
Good morning. Yes. Look, what's really important here that people need to understand is we have the President of the United States defying a 9-0 unanimous Supreme Court decision to bring Kilmar back home to the United States. This, in my opinion, is on its way to a constitutional crisis in this country. You cannot defy not just Supreme Court, but also lower courts. The Trump administration has also said that they sent Mr. Abrego Garcia here on accident. It is time to bring Kilmar home, and we're continuing the work of Senator Van Hollen. Look, we will not be the last members of the delegation to be here. There's other senators and members of Congress that will be here in El Salvador. But it's really important that we advocate for his release. He has been wrongly sent here, as have, by the way, hundreds of other individuals who are in our country in different status, asylum seekers, people that were on some type of permit, some type of student visas we know are being deported across the country as well to other places. And so this is a moment for us to stand for our values and for due process in this country. We also know it's not just about Kilmar. There's a young man named Avery down here, 19 years old, a young gay man, hairdresser, seeking asylum. Got sent here. We have no proof of life yet of how he's doing. So we have a lot of work to do. We're on our way actually to the embassy to get a classified briefing in just about an hour.
You're certainly right to highlight it's more than just this one case that's gotten so much attention. You mentioned how the Trump administration seems to be in defiance, or at least delay bordering on defiance, of a Supreme Court ruling. But they've also made the claim that they simply, well, we don't have any jurisdiction anymore. He's in El Salvadorian custody. Tell us what you make of that argument and what you'll say to the El Salvadorian officials you'll see later today.
Well, we know that there is no question that if Donald Trump, the president, wants to have Kilmar back home, he would be back home. He, of course, has a very strong relationship with the president of El Salvador, and they are working together on this. The president of the United States sent Kilmar here by accident. The courts have said he needs to return, and the president needs to act. We're here to continue that pressure on the Trump administration and also to build support here in El Salvador for Kilmar's release and to bring attention to the facility that's here, the jail that's here, where we know hundreds of people, Venezuelan migrants, people that are seeking asylum, folks that were here like Kilmar who are wrongly sent here. The attention here on this issue is important, especially because you have a president that is defying the Supreme Court. And I can't tell you how important it is our country that every single person, regardless of where they're at in their status, whether they have a work visa, whether they have a student visa, whether they're exercising their free First Amendment rights, they have a due process right in our country. We've got to maintain that.
Democratic Congressman Robert Garcia of California, important words. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Safe travels to you.